Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Security Table. This is Chris Romeo. I'm also joined by Tanya Ward, Matt Coles, Izar Tarandosh, all of my friends, what I collectively call the gang, around the security table here.
He calls us friends.
Yeah, of course. We're all friends here until we start discussing and debating, and then sometimes it gets a little heated. That's okay. That's why we have the security table. And so just a really easy one today for us to deal with. I mean, the United States government came out with a National Cybersecurity Strategy. And so we could probably knock this out in like 5 minutes. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's literally only like 35 pages or something. So it's in the world of government documents, it's actually pretty short. But there's a lot of stuff in here to talk about. And so when I think about this from a high level, you know, it's certainly something that we have to have. But let's talk about it from a high level first. Like, before we even get into the details behind it, like what are folks' kind of perceptions of this when you're thinking about this National Cybersecurity Strategy?
So I think that the first thing to realize is that it's a strategy. So it's okay that it's short on details of implementation. With that, taking that into consideration, I'm very happy that the last page or so is a window into implementation, how they think that this is going to go in. So that's already a good sign, I think, right? But all in all, I think that they say all the right things. It looks like it's very targeted at certain audiences. So like, China, are you listening? There are some things that outright made me a bit worried and even afraid sometimes. But there are many things that made me happy.
Okay. So Tanya, what's your kind of high level perceptions of this strategy?
Similar observations to Zara. I thought it was a well thought out document. It hits all the key points. Talks a lot about the ransomware attacks. It goes into kind of really investing in our infrastructure. It talks about how do we really, when you think about the things that we sell and the things that we put out there, we all work within security, and security is always, if you think security versus functionality, security sometimes is the one that's kind of deprioritized in some cases. And it's starting to draw light that you may not make monetary gains necessarily as a result of it, but they're now starting to think about regulations and how to really drive that as a key point. And that really excites me as well. I think this is absolutely where we need to be at this moment in time. And also acknowledge, I was excited to see the implementation side of it at the end, 2 pages at the end of the 37-page document, because as you're reading through, there's a lot of words like efficient and scale. And naturally, when it's a strategy, but I'm thinking, well, what is efficiency? What does that necessarily mean? So I'm excited to see how they explore that and take this concept and then actually start implementing out on it. But there was really no surprises.
Okay, Matt, how about you?
Yeah, all in all, I think I'll agree with everything Izar and Tanya have said. I like the fact also that it was laid out. It covered points about a lot of defensive posture stuff, but some offensive posture things as well. Partnership was mentioned a significant number of times throughout the document, and both within the federal government, obviously talking U.S. federal government here, as well as between private and public sectors. So as a vision document, I think that was good. I don't think this is the first time we've seen this, though. So we'll see if in practice how this gets adopted. But I think in general, this is different from the presidential executive order on cybersecurity, which seemed more of a mandate, more of a not less of a strategy and more of an action document. And this looks more like a high level policy reinforcement, I think, is maybe the way I would say it, with some specific changes I'm sure we'll get into around how public-private partnerships and interactions work.
I want to just call out that was another eye-opening, the amount of acronyms in the document for all these different partnerships. All the different, like, I think I've written it down. There's like the SRMA, there's like the DFI, there's like, but it's just sheer, like this sheer scale of everyone having to come together is just, it's just phenomenal.
So on the acronym thing, there are at least 20 different acronyms for agencies and parts of the government mentioned here. But with that, only twice the acronym SBOM appears.
Yay!
That's good. That's good, because some of us have strong opinions about SBOM, and so I'll probably end up being more of the pundit in this exercise today, just because as I went through this and I read every word of it from top to bottom, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but the easy part is laying out the vision and this strategy. Like, you can write a vision and strategy all day long. It's when the rubber meets the road is where this gets interesting and where it gets challenging, and you start to think about the scale of the technology industry and everybody that's going to have to get on board with this. And that's when I start to become a little more cynical, I guess, about this thing ever turning into anything. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with a lot of things they say. Do I think I'm going to see it in the next 10 years? Well, we'll get there. We'll get there when we start to unpack it.
The thing with writing a strategy and having a vision, I think, one of the things is that you have to tread a very thin line between the obvious that everybody knows and tomorrow's problems. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that in here that me, at least, as I read, I go, yeah, that may, But then you get to some lines that immediately take you to, but how?
Did you feel like it was pride? Like, I didn't really get a sense that, when normally you think about strategy, you have this overall concept, but then maybe it goes to the how, but I still feel like some strategies could potentially be prioritized.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. There was not a whole lot of It didn't come across as prioritization. I think it sort of said
everything is important,
right? But it laid it. I mean, for me, it laid it out. So I think I love using the word defense in depth. Right? It's a defense in depth approach. There's all these layers. These pillars are more like layers, right? It isn't just that they're pillars sometimes brings to mind silos, but I read these as layers of defense or layers of action, right? I mean, because some are defense and some are offense.
I mean, if all the pillars aren't there, you can't handle the weight of whatever's sitting on top of it, though. And
that could be true. Well, maybe that's why people like to use the onion. We could use domes. It's domes, right? So it's spheres that carry their own weight. But anyway, it's a little bit of geometry and physics going on there.
No, this is the physics hour.
One thing that I didn't see there, or I seem to remember a very thin mention of 10 years or something. Just a second. I didn't see any kind of time horizon for this thing to happen. So that to me, it was looking back at over the last 10 years. That to me bothers me a bit, because government, at least at the strategy levels, comes and goes, right? It's 4-year units, sometimes eight. And this stuff is going to take time. Some of this stuff is time that we yourselves have been doing for tens of years. Right? Mm-hmm. And without too much knowledge about how the U.S. government operates, I wonder to myself, how much of this is binding at all? Does this now have to be translated into actual laws that bind the government to do something? And
some
what
of
happens
it does.
with the next government?
Yeah.
Is it still bound to this?
Some of it will be if they can pass legislation, like we're going to get to this, and I'm jumping way ahead, but there's this section on shift liability for insecure software products and services that has language that says Congress will have to enact laws, blah, 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 to make this a reality.
So let's really shortly jump there. Okay, so last September, if memory serves right, we had Mudge at Congress testifying about Twitter's AppSec failures, ProdSec failures, right?
Yep.
And then we had Congress send a letter to the Twitter CEO, Agarwal, asking him to produce documentation attestating to the fact that those things were right or wrong. And then, poof, Elon came in, did what he did with Twitter, and all that stuff apparently disappeared. So to me, that sounds like Congress taking something into their hands and saying this is really important and we are going to go to the bottom of this as a very, very limited short life. Yeah. So how do I contrast that with the lofty goals in the strategy that depend on Congress?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is not dependent on Congress, though. It's dependent on other agencies. Yeah, other agencies are going to have to run, CISA, for example, is going to have to be at the center of a lot of these things.
But you need law backing to be able to tell
for
CISA
some of them.
Is going to ask
for some of them. Others you don't. Like for implementing requirements for critical infrastructure. That's not going to be a law.
Yeah. But what you were saying before, the shifting what was it? Responsibility or blame?
Liability.
Yeah. Shifting the liability. That you actually need a law, right?
And they called it out. They called out in that section that Congress will need to enact laws to make this a reality. And so, but with a lot of the other ones, I think it's in the power of presuming the individual parts of the government have budget. It becomes part of their charter and part of them executing and using their budget to meet these goals versus needing congressional backing to do it. So, but I think let's start going through it, because I think we'll find some examples and we can start to pick away at those examples and understand, and then we can talk about, is there congressional requirement? Do we need laws to make this a reality? Because some of these things, there's been laws talked about as well. But let's start with the introduction kind of sections before we get into the pillars, because there was one that caught my attention. It was right on page 3, the section on malicious actors. As a security professional, I've certainly thought about malicious actors and the challenges of nation state, but this really focused in, and I thought it was very well written. Talking about, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and then going into details about what some of the challenges have been in how they've come after us in the past as the United States of America. And then there was just a depth to this section that for me, it was educational. And I felt like I already knew quite a bit about this section, but it was helpful for me to get the perspective of the government right now about what they're seeing from these particular areas. So,
it was actually very refreshing. I think it was very refreshing too, because while this document is probably targeted at big corporations and obviously the federal government, and because a number of organizations are going to need to look at this and understand what's coming, what's going to be expected of them, how they may organize, but also the folks like us, the security professionals, who then it's going to trickle down to eventually, or I don't know that the general populace would be interested in something like this, but certainly there are folks out in the population who are not security professionals who will look at this. And it's good to see, sort of peeling back the layers a little bit here about what are some of the challenges we're facing. As if we didn't know, but it's always good to reinforce that there are very specific actors who are doing things that we need to be aware of and try to avoid getting harmed by.
I always think it's good to have these types of opening. It's a level set. It's a kind of a rechecking in the reality check of what's happening in the world. Technology is changing, functionality, that it kind of goes back to initially, like we still have a lot of old a lot of old systems out there. The switch then from analog to digital, like it's just this whole ecosystem that we're working in. Like my mom may not understand about the digital ecosystem, but she certainly understands, like, if she's teaching and some of the new ways that she had to teach during COVID, like she gets that kind of concept. And I don't know, I thought it was a good reality check and something that everybody can understand.
To me, I think that to both your points, in that bit, the one sentence that caught my attention was, okay, China, North Korea, Iran, bad people do bad stuff. Fine. Actually, people do bad stuff.
Yeah, be
Because
careful. Yeah.
for them, they're not bad people. They have their interests, and nations operate on interests. They're not good or bad.
But also we should be cognizant of it's not necessarily the entire populace of those nations.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the line that caught my attention in there was the cyber operations of criminal syndicates now represent a threat to the national security, public safety, and economic prosperity of the United States and its allies and partners. So not only it elevates criminal syndicates to a national security problem, which opens up a whole set of tools that can be used against them now, but it also includes allies and partners. So NATO and all that good
United
stuff
Nations and
comes under that umbrella. And when you start at the end, it says criminal syndicates often operate out of states that do not cooperate with U.S. law enforcement and frequently encourage, harbor, and tolerate such activities. So now you are bringing to the public eye the fact that, yeah, it's a criminal enterprise, but it could well be a government standing behind it. Like we know that North Korea has all kinds of criminal enterprises that they deal with, drugs and smuggling and whatnot. But now elevating that to cyber and putting that on national strategy and saying, hey, yeah, you're a criminal. We ordinarily would say that the local police has to deal with you, but actually, no, you are a government. So now it becomes a bit higher level than that.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty important to put out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that is pretty important. I'm gonna just add another perspective here that I think it's important for us to acknowledge this, and this may not be popular, but I don't care. I'm going to say it anyway. The United States government, does cyber operations as well. Not cybercrime. I don't think our government is proliferating cybercrime by any stretch of the imagination. But it's important to acknowledge, like, this is our, and you know, I live in the United States of America. I'm a citizen here. This is our governmental perspective looking outbound. But don't lose focus on the fact that we perform cyber operations against other nations and whatnot. Like, the United States is not sitting here in a bubble, not participating in cyber capabilities and cyber, types of things as well. So I think it's important to, especially if we have people who are listening to this that maybe are not as plugged in as we are, just important to realize that the United States government does operations as well.
That's a very important point to put out there. But without going into the good guys, bad guys, I think that the text by itself makes a very clear distinction that we are talking about the kind of cyber operations that can be understood as a criminal activity.
Okay,
so
good point.
The actors that have been, apart from China, the actors that have been named in here, Iran, North Korea, they're under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of limitations in what they can do with their money in the international market and all that stuff. And these criminal enterprises, sometimes they are a lifeline in terms of moving money around or getting resources or getting money. Like we are not just talking about cyber espionage, industrial espionage, or anything like that, right? But we are actually talking about dollars coming in. So specifying that moves the criminal operation at the volumes that we see nowadays, which are not small, moving to a strategic level, which is pretty important.
Now, wouldn't you, I mean, not to touch upon that, to spend a lot of time here, but there are other criminal enterprises that operate at nation-state levels that are not nation-state backed.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? Cartels and,
But that's the distinction. Cartels and stuff like that, mostly, and to the best of my knowledge, and I could be very wrong here, the U.S. manages to have some kind of cooperation with local law enforcement agencies at some level. to have an oversight to do local operations against these people, with the participation of the United States, of course, but locally led. The actors that are named in here, you're not going to see Iran inviting the FBI in any time to do investigations into Iran.
It's true. Yeah. Okay. I think it was a good distinction, though. And Izar, I'm glad you pointed us back to that. The document is focused on criminal syndicates, like cyber operations of criminal syndicates, in regards to these other countries and whatnot. Anybody else have anything in the introduction before we get to Pillar 1? What else? Anything in the introduction you wanted to talk about?
I want to highlight. So on page 4. So on page 4, and this really goes to. I mean, I think we're going to talk a lot about. You brought it up. Shift of liability. But I read a little bit more into this, so the statement here is a single person's momentary lapse in judgment, use of an outdated password, or errant click of a suspicious link, and I would even suggest maybe not even a suspicious link in some cases, should not have national security consequences. Our collective cyber resilience cannot rely on the constant vigilance of our smallest organizations and individual citizens. Mm-hmm. Now, it's important. It didn't say exclusively, right? So we still need citizens to be diligent, right? But the message here is it's not just their problem. And I the first half of that sentence is, if a single individual has a level of control or a level of capability that can result in damage of critical infrastructure, or otherwise cause leak of secrets or whatever at the national security level, then obviously we need to solve that problem. But I'm a little perplexed actually about what are the bounds of this conversation in its entirety, right? What is the U.S. boundary with respect to national security? Is it critical infrastructure within our borders? But and I bring that up because obviously we work with multinational corporations, right, that have locations all over the world and employees that are connected to those corporations. What's the extent of this policy document or this strategy? Right? What constitutes the extent of national what constitutes the extent of national security, and what consequences would we foresee here?
Are you talking about scope, like the scope of the industries?
Scope of industries, but also the policy direction here.
Well, the document covers improvements to the internet as a whole. Yeah. Which you could argue, I guess you could argue the internet's critical infrastructure at this point of our existence as a society or a collection of societies. But I think it's probably bigger than just critical infrastructure.
Yeah. It also talks about throughout the document somewhere around the about protecting, being stewards of personal data and making sure that companies who handle personal data, it's responsible for protecting it as well.
Yeah, that's true. That was a good point.
Much broader. I think it's a private and public sector. It's
absolutely.
In that same scope, I read the same sentence that Matt called out in a different way. To me, it looks like, especially because of the title of the section, rebalance the responsibility to defend cyberspace. I see it as a preamble to coming and saying, everything is too free, everything is too accessible. Because people will have these momentary lapses in judgment. That's just human nature.
But isn't this what we want, though? Like, when I was thinking about this, I'm glad Matt drew attention to this, because I remember reading it and I didn't note it. But as a security professional, I want systems, I want to build products and systems in such a way that I can take away the challenge that the individual, perhaps uneducated user has. And I'll give you an example with phishing. Think about how phishing has evolved now to the fact that you shouldn't have a report phishing button anymore, because you've got technology that is so good on the server side that's preventing, and and it's not perfect, but you think about the number of phishing emails you get today versus the number we got 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, every morning you would have a few in your inbox to sift through and look at and go, that's not it. I think about how often does a phishing email get to my inbox these days? Not very often. And it's because the products and systems and technology behind that problem have gotten to the point where they're insulating me as a user, but they're also insulating somebody who doesn't do cybersecurity for a living. So isn't that what we want?
But Chris,
Yeah.
that's what you want as the draconian monocle-wearing security professional.
Well, let me get my monocle. Hold on. Where's my monocle? Where is it?
The rest of the world, you just get like,
Yeah, there we go.
the rest of the world, they want information to be free, right? They want everything to be everywhere. They want everything to be accessible. We want people to move between environments easy and free. So that's exactly what I saw here. In these few paragraphs, I saw a call out for the industry to start reining back those things and saying, no, not everybody should be able to fire nuclear missiles whenever they feel like. We need at least two people turning the keys at the same time, right? And that, in time, is going to generate some form of backlash. And now there's a strategy to come back and say, remember when we talked about that stuff here?
Mm-hmm. So you think this is the precursor to Big Brother, to 1984?
No, I'm not going that far. I think that this is the precursor to be able to tell, for example, somebody in the supply chain of the defense industry, somebody that I don't know, they create parts for a fighter jet or something. It's a precursor to telling them, we have to take a look at the list of people that work for you, and we're going to have a say if new candidates can work with you or not.
I mean, they do that now, though. That exists. That's called the security clearance process. And
down to which level?
I mean, yeah, I mean, you have to vet people that work in critical.
But that goes
and you
together
have
with
for
the
50
information
years.
classification. It doesn't go into the fact that sometimes the guy milling the machine, perhaps he doesn't, milling the part, he doesn't know all the details of the part, but he has the ability of measuring that part and moving those measurements around. But
Sure.
he didn't get to vet it because he just operates the machine that makes the part.
Oh, I think they vet those.
I think
Those
they
folks
vet
get vetted.
everybody.
Yeah,
Not all
yeah.
of them. At some point, it stops because it stops being economically viable. It takes a lot of money to vet someone.
I would want to fact check that a little deeper because in my understanding and experience about that world is that people are very well vetted, and the reason why a fighter jet costs what it does isn't because it's made out of alloys that are found in some planet on the other side of the galaxy. It's because you've got all that process and regulation and everything that goes into building that thing. It's not
And
like
because there's a lot of bloat in there, but anyway.
that's a whole other issue. That's a whole other issue.
I was curious, kind of jumping onto what you said, Matt. The part that really got me interested in that section that you were talking about was together, partnership, together. I love that word, together. Together, industry and government must drive effective and equitable collaboration. And I think this is the summary of everything that we're trying to do. Correct market failures, because obviously if there's a loss of financial, it has a direct impact on the economy. Then, minimize harms from cyber, incidents to society. So when I think about, you think about malware attacks in hospitals. Who's attacking? That to me, attacking those systems and trying to bring things down, it's almost like it's a human right issue here. And then the other one was defend our shared digital ecosystem, which is like protecting my data, like protecting, the information that may be about me within that ecosystem. So I'm curious to know from you, when we talk about that together, partnership, what does that really mean? Does that mean regulation? Does it mean we work together on things? Do we establish standards that are out there? Because there are standards that talk up, that are out there about a lot of different things. And then I'm thinking there's so many standards, there's so many different frameworks coming out. But anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
To me, it means...
Go ahead, Azar.
Absolutely nothing. Okay? I file it under the duh category. Like, yeah, everybody has to work together, of course. Otherwise, nothing is going to ever get done.
But
on the other hand, when have we ever worked together? We love to say that we work together. What?
We don't work together?
Government and private... sure, when the money is good. But at some point, again, those interests start diverging, and that's when you get friction, and that's when you get slowdown. And yeah, we are working together. We're just not getting anywhere with the work.
But I mean, industry's not going to work together unless there's some benefit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Because this is free market economy. This is like I don't do things in a company. Sometimes I do things for the greater good, perhaps. But in general, I do things because, one, there's a regulation or some mandate that says I have to. Suck too. I'm sorry, I had something in my throat there. I'm sorry. I'm back now. But that's so. When I think about together, these words together, industry and governments drive effective. It does seem like kind of high level perspective. Like, I don't think industry is in general going to stand up and say we're going to do everything in this. There's going to have to be some pushing that's happening to make this a reality.
Which is where the law discussion comes in, right? Unless you put some sort of very big stick behind this thing, there isn't enough carrots.
Well,
especially when your interests diverge.
Some organizations, companies, etc., will look at this as an opportunity. There's obviously gaps that need to be filled, right? And they may want to. We see this with standards all the time, right? Companies will drive standards in a certain way. Not only do they have the vision and the capability to be able to solve a problem and to innovate in a certain way, but obviously they want to be able to play in that environment that gets created. And so it really, I mean, we've been doing this for decades, right? I mean, DARPA is not strictly a public organization, public sector organization. There's partnerships with NIST and MITRE and others all over the place. And so, this is not a new concept. So I think this is more of a reinvigoration of that sort of the tail end of this section. I think is you're right, Tanya, is really highlighting partnership. Let's all get together.
Yeah.
I sense it as a re-up of the desire of the federal government to work with organizations. But I want to bring us back to the very beginning of that section, and the second statement I think highlights it here. Right, today end users bear too great a burden for mitigating cyber risks. This is a clear call to action that whatever mitigations we thought were in place, or whatever mitigations we provided to customers or to users to safeguard themselves, the U.S. government is suggesting that we need to build that stuff in.
But
and I think we've.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, Matt.
I was just going to add. This is, I think, where. I mean, it's in the section title. It's mentioned as in bold text, and just prior to that, 2 fundamental shifts in how the United States allocate roles, responsibilities, and resources in cyberspace. Right. This is a plan of action to push, and this is back to the liability question, right? Push more action on the part of vendors and suppliers and corporations to do right by their customers, and not have those customers being the federal government in many cases, as opposed to the government taking on those actions itself.
But if you raise the bar, like when I think about what you just said. One, you can achieve that with companies with regulation. You can also achieve it by raising the bar across the industry. And so by raising the bar across the industry, I think companies do care about their customers' data at this point. Like, I wouldn't have said that. I think I'd say that 5 years ago. I probably wouldn't say it 10 years ago, just looking across my experience in the industry. I don't think anybody doesn't care about their customer data at this point. I think that the bar could be raised, though, as a way to lead them into this.
I think if you kind of move on to the next strategic objective, 1.1, it does call out that the marketplace insufficiently rewards, which was the initial point that I had brought up before, and often disadvantages the owners and operators of critical infrastructure. I would say it's more than critical infrastructure. We're honed in on it. But going back to the point of the 3 different kind of areas that they're targeting, who actually invest in proactive measures to prevent or mitigate the effects of cyber incidents. So it's not just what you were saying. It's not about that users don't necessarily, or they're not aware about how to protect themselves. I think it's a case of, people are making, or, companies are making decisions when they put out products to try to maybe capitalize on putting more features in versus really thinking about how to protect, when the product gets deployed or whatever an application gets deployed, that actually it's got all the, as you said, the defense in depth and all the appropriate controls in place to prevent it. So it's a bit confusing between there's all a company aspect to it and what you build, but there's also end user, I think, as well.
You're looking
confused,
perplexed,
concerned, frustrated.
He's coming up with the word of the day. I can feel it.
No. Well, the word of the day.
He asked ChatGPT, and he was waiting for the answer to spit out.
Yeah, no, I was going back here trying to look for the place where Tanya was, but one thing that keeps coming back to me is what Chris said about being in the industry for the greater good, and I keep thinking to how many private initiatives actually work for their good, and going back to the incentives thing and some of what Tanya alluded to, how do we push companies to work together and then match with the standards? And that got me to, page 23, where the strategy addresses, for example, DNS and BGP and IPv6. And they call it a cleanup, which to me is a nice kick on the back of academia, because we know that IPv4 and DNS as it was and BGP started down there. But hey, DARPA had a say on it too. But the point is that these are standards and they are the backbones of what we do and use today. So how would government and private initiative work together to fix just these three things? Actually, let's take just one. Let's say BGP. Okay? No, sorry, I don't know how much you guys are familiar with BGP. Let's go with DNS. So DNS is a IETF, correct me if I'm wrong, it's an IETF protocol, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
wait, Matt. The strategy says that the way that the government is going to do this is by promoting that they are going to use better standards. Now, how does that fit with the working together, Tanya? And what kind of incentives are we giving to industry to work globally better because the U.S. government is improving itself? You see where I'm going with this? Like there is a dance in here between government and.
Well, that's kind of like when I was reading. I kind of felt similar to you in terms of different sections that I was reading. It was a bit unclear,
It's not that it's unclear. I see here sort of like there's a strange tug of war in here where both parties are apparently on the same side.
Yeah, but when you think about this, like. The U.S. government doesn't control IETF. The U.S. government doesn't control the internet.
It doesn't control anything.
The internet, the internet is governed by the IETF, which generates standards, which then has generated more secure alternatives to DNS, for example. Right? Like there is a way to embed cryptographic signatures, DNSSEC. For some reason I can't believe I couldn't put those two things together. But
what the strategy is saying, and you are pointing to, is there are better standards, and our way to push them forward together with private initiative is for the U.S. government to adopt them faster.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that the U.S. government can do, though, right? Because the internet, the U.S. government, it doesn't own the internet. The U.S. government can't deprecate DNS, older RFCs in regards to DNS because it doesn't have the power to do it.
That's not what I'm asking them to do. I'm asking what impact, if at all, the U.S. government saying we are going to adopt these secure technologies faster is going to have on the private side. There are no incentives. There are no penalties.
Yeah.
How many companies have you heard, oh, we're going to go to IPv6 because the US government just did?
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I mean,
sorry, you just so I understand, you're saying that if the government, your point is if the government leads by example, everybody else will follow suit.
No.
And so you're saying that we're assuming that that's obviously incorrect, but it's called out in the document.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Look, they say such a cleanup, quotes, their quotes, effort to reduce systemic risk requires identification of the most pressing of these security challenges, further development of effective security measures, and close collaboration between public and private sectors to reduce our risk exposure, without disrupting the platforms and services built atop this infrastructure. Okay? The federal government will lead by ensuring that its networks have implemented these and other security measures, while partnering with stakeholders, whatever that is, to develop and drive adoption of solutions that will improve blah, 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 blah. So they will lead by adopting standards that, as Chris points out, already exist, that have not been globally adopted because PKI is hard. So it's great that you called out BGP and DNS, two things that make people really lose sleep and rightly at night. But then you kick the ball to a tomorrow problem by saying, hey, we're going to do the right thing. You guys do whatever you want.
Well, so let's just be, this goes back to the scope question I think I asked earlier, right? So it's sort of, this document plays in a number of different areas, and I think that's the important thing here. So the U.S. government has options when it comes to critical infrastructure, right? We probably need a history lesson about how what the internet is and how it actually formed, right? It is not a thing of and of itself. It is a collection of networks. Those collection of networks are run by organizations and governments that manage the connectivity between systems. And it's always an option for any government to be able to create a closed network, right? They don't have to be on the public internet, right? Why does Facebook and the air defense systems for the U.S. need to be on the same network, right? So we should be careful here. Maybe this is adding some credence or some weight, federal direction to federal agencies, to say, listen, do we really need to have the internet as our backbone? Now, I'm not saying that they're just going to turn off connectivity. Either they can't or they shouldn't. But they have options, right? They could go ahead and implement DNSSEC or IPv6 or IPv10 or whatever they want to do, right? All advanced research stuff, and they call out RD&D, which is research, development, and demonstration. So not just designing new things, but designing new things that work.
Yeah,
and they can demonstrate it works, and they provide value. They give them the capabilities they want, and either they can do it by themselves, or they can do it with others who have technical expertise and make us a true partnership, because Facebook can benefit from IPv10 just as well as the U.S. government can.
But I would add in that it's a lead by example, because if the government says, well, we're going to start adopting these, as you coined it, these protocols that have already, these more secure protocols that have existed for a period of time, then people that are buying into that space, the federal space, are going to start to have to support it. And then what will happen is there's this cascading effect that, so I do think in time that it will drive, you're looking like surprised. I mean, let me put it into like, if I say, hey, Chris, when you come over to my house, I want to make sure you do this, this, and this. At some point that becomes, a behavior, a characteristical change that will end up happening in other areas.
I'm just going to ask again. When was the last time that you saw anybody do any kind of systemic change just because the U.S. government led by example?
Do you not think GASPON potentially? Do you not think that's changing the industry?
We had that episode.
It's changing one industry. It's creating an S-bomb industry. That's
But
a great
it's
thing.
not.
True.
It's almost like you have like you're expecting that things are just going to happen overnight. It takes time. Change takes time.
Yeah, and I think to Tanya, I think what Tanya's saying is like I think it's not going to hurt anything for the U.S. government to try to because but if you think about it, like if all of the federal agencies fall into this and start following these practices, the defense industrial complex or the Lockheed Martins and whatnot of the world will do that because they follow the government. And so there's a chance there could be.
They'll do it because they have to be interoperational. Not
Yeah,
because they are
but that
that
could drag more of industry into it though over time. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this episode. We're right in the middle of it, right in the thick of it here. But
we haven't made it to pillar one yet.
We haven't even gotten to pillar one yet, and there's 5 pillars. We're still in the intro. But what I'm going to do is we're going to put a bookmark right here in this conversation, and we'll pick this up in our next episode. And then I swear we'll at least get to pillar one. We will cover pillar one in the next hour of the security table, most definitely, and hopefully a little bit more. But
we'll lead by example and get to pillar one. Yeah.
That's right. Come on, pillar one. But folks, thanks.
Then everybody has to follow.
Everybody will get. So, folks, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Security Table, where we'll continue this conversation of the National Cybersecurity Strategy that's come out here in the United States. Thanks for listening.